on February 18, 1942, following the fall of Singapore to Japanese forces. A systematic and brutal massacre was conducted by the Japanese military during World War II. They called it Suk Ching, which translates to purge through cleansing. This event primarily targeted the Chinese population in Singapore and Malaysia, and was said to be driven by the Japanese belief that the local Chinese community was a threat due to their support of the anti-Japanese movement in China. The directive for the massacre came from higher Japanese military authorities who were so determined to secure their control over Singapore by eliminating any potential threats from the Chinese population. Of course, this decision was influenced by the perception that the Chinese community was sympathetic to the anti-Japanese movement in China and could support resistance efforts against the Japanese occupation. A senior officer in the Kempei Tai, the Japanese military police, Colonel Hishikari Takafumi, was entrusted with the responsibility of carrying out this directive. Known for his ruthlessness, Hishikari was instrumental in carrying out the general orders into a systematic plan of action. He coordinated with other military officials to establish the framework for the operation. This included setting up multiple screening centres across Singapore, where Chinese males aged 18 to 50 would be identified, detained and executed. The selection criteria were primarily aimed at tenuous connections to anti-Japanese activities, previous affiliations with Chinese nationalist organisations, or even personal grudges. Under Hishikari's oversight, the Kempei Tai and other Japanese military personnel conducted thorough interrogations at various locations, such as the YMCA building on Stamford Road, the Central Police Station, and other public facilities. The goal was to identify anyone deemed suspicious or potentially disloyal to the Japanese regime. Once identified, the suspects were transported to designated execution sites, including Changi Beach, Punggol Beach and Sentosa Island. Hishikari was also involved in the logistical planning to ensure the efficient transport and disposal of bodies. These locations were chosen for their isolation, allowing the Japanese military to carry out the killings with minimal interference and visibility. Estimating the exact number of victims killed during the massacre was outrageous due to the circumstances, but various sources provide a range of figures that help to illustrate the scale of the atrocity, like the British military administration, which conducted investigations and war crimes trials after the war, estimated that around 25,000 Chinese civilians were killed. We might add that these estimates were based on survivor testimonies, local reports, and examinations of mass graves. It is acknowledged that the actual number could be higher. This higher estimate takes into account the larger scale nature of the roundups and the numerous execution sites used. Although several factors complicate the determination of an exact death toll, the lack of comprehensive records from the period of the operation and the destruction of evidence all contribute to the uncertainty. Many bodies were disposed in mass graves, and not all were accounted for or identified during post-war investigations. The immediate post-war period was marked by significant upheaval, making systematic documentation and investigation difficult. Testimonies from survivors and witnesses vary, with some providing higher estimates based on their observations and others unable to give precise numbers due to the trauma they experienced. Regardless of the exact figure, the Suk Ching massacre had a devastating impact on the Chinese community in Singapore. The scale of the killings created a climate of fear and trauma that spanned across even long after the war. Families were torn apart, entire communities decimated, and the social fabric of Singapore was deeply affected. The massacre also caused significant social and economic disruption due to the fact that many of the victims were community leaders, businessmen and heads of families, whose deaths left a vacuum in both the social and economic structures of the community. Not to talk about the local economy, which was already strained by the war and occupation, suffering further setbacks as businesses were left without leadership and skilled workers. The collective memory of the massacre influenced the community's sense of identity and solidarity, fostering a deep-seated wariness of external threats and a determination to preserve their history and culture. Following the end of World War II, the British authorities conducted war crimes trials to hold those responsible for the massacre accountable. Eventually, several Japanese military officers, including key figures like Colonel Hishikari Takafumi, were tried and convicted for their roles in the Sukching massacre. The trials were significant in establishing a historical record of the events and providing a sense of closure to some survivors. However, not all perpetrators were brought to justice. Sadly, some escaped prosecution, leaving a sense of incomplete justice among the affected communities. In the years following the massacre, efforts were made to locate and properly handle the remains of the massacre victims. The lack of thorough records meant that many bodies were hastily buried in mass graves across various execution sites, including Changi Beach, Punggol Beach, and Sentosa Island. After the war, the British authorities, along with local community leaders and volunteers, undertook the task of exhuming these graves. The remains found were often incomplete, and identifying individual victims proved challenging. But these efforts were crucial in documenting the scale of the massacre and providing some form of closure to the families of the deceased. One of the most prominent symbols of commemoration for the Sukching massacre victims is the Civilian War Memorial in Singapore, also known as the Chopsticks Memorial. Unveiled on February 15, 1967, the memorial consists of 4 white concrete pillars, each representing the 4 main ethnic groups of Singapore: the Chinese, Malays, Indians, and others who suffered during the Japanese occupation. The memorial stands as a solemn reminder of the massacre and the broader suffering endured by civilians during the war. Beneath the memorial lies a burial chamber containing the remains of unidentified victims exhumed from various mass grave sites. This symbolic act of laying the remains to rest in a central, dignified location was supposed to honor the memory of the victims. Now, every year on February 15th, which is also Total Defence Day in Singapore, remembrance ceremonies are held at the Civilian War Memorial. These ceremonies involve the participation of government officials, community leaders, and members of the public. These annual events serve to keep the memory of the massacre alive, fostering a sense of unity and reflection within the community. They are an opportunity to educate younger generations about the historical significance of the events and to reinforce the values of resilience and solidarity. Playing a crucial role in the commemoration of the Sukching massacre, with museums such as the National Museum of Singapore, dedicating exhibits that document the events of the Japanese occupation, including the massacre. These exhibits often feature personal stories, photographs and artifacts that bring history to life and help visitors understand the human impact of the tragedy. Might also add, these educational efforts ensure that the lessons of the past are not forgotten and that the memories of those who suffered are preserved for future generations. Various community and cultural initiatives also contribute to the commemoration of the Sukching massacre. Local heritage groups and historical societies often organise talks, walks and exhibitions that explore the events and their impact on Singaporean society. These grassroots efforts are essential in maintaining a living memory of the past and engaging the community in active remembrance. There has also been an increased focus on educating younger generations about the Sukching massacre and the broader context of the Japanese occupation. Museums, such as the National Museum of Singapore, and educational programs have incorporated these historical events into their exhibits and curricula. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, comment and share, and also subscribe to our channel to see more of what we have in store for you.